Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Your Gray Matters. Thanks for joining us after the holidays. Hope you had a good holiday season. Dad, hello. How did your holidays go?
My holidays were great. Hope everybody had a great time. And we're excited to be back on your Gray Matters podcast.
Yeah, this week's podcast is really, really interesting. We've got Dr. Jeff Karp on the show, someone who has been involved in a number of interesting things.
Yeah, he is a world-renowned biomedical engineer. He's also an inventor based on things that he has learned from nature.
Yeah.
He started out as a learning disabled young man, and today he's world renowned, making things that affect all of our lives every single day. I'm excited to have him on the show.
Yeah, so please stick around, watch that. Remember to like and subscribe by clicking the subscribe button below. Leave a comment if you like, and enjoy the episode.
Have fun, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Hi, everybody. I'm Neil from Your Gray Matters. Welcome back. I hope that you had a great Christmas and New Year's season. We're glad to be back with you. And as you know, with this podcast, because I know that you've been following it, whether you have gray hair or no hair or red hair, but come on, we know what's under that red hair. We're loving having you on the show. And today we are really privileged. I mean, really privileged. We have with us Dr. Jeff Karp. Hi, Dr. Karp. Is it okay if
Hi there.
Hi, thanks for coming on. Is it okay if I call you Jeff?
Absolutely. I'd prefer that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Everybody, Jeff Karp is world renowned. He is an incredible mind. He has done tremendous things that improve all of our lives. And we're just thrilled to have you on, Jeff. Everybody, I want to tell you a bit about Jeff. It's a great bio. This should be like the best 20 minutes of your life. And Professor Jeff Karp is a chaired professor at Brigham and Women's Hospital, Harvard Medical School, and he's a committed lifelong mentor. Professor Karp's bio-inspired innovations have led to many seminal publications with over 32,000 citations. He's in the top 0.1% of the 2023 Clarivet ranking. That ranking, by the way, cites the best of the best in researchers who have broad influence in their field. It's amazing. He has co-founded 10 companies that have raised over 600 million US dollars with multiple products in development or on the market. Jeff was elected a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors, Royal Society of Chemistry, American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering's College of Fellows, Biomedical Engineering Society, and the Canadian Academy of Engineering. His lab's technologies include a nasal spray to neutralize pathogens, a tissue glue that can seal holes inside a beating heart, targeted therapy for osteoarthritis and inflammatory bowel disease, needles that automatically stop when they reach their target, and so much more. In addition to his research goals, Karp is dedicated to supporting the careers of next-generation bioengineers at the forefront of biomedical innovation. I love that. Leadership development's terrific. He was selected as the outstanding faculty undergraduate mentor among all faculty at MIT, and he received the HST McMahon Mentoring Award for being the top mentor of Harvard MIT students. To date, 30 trainees from his laboratory have secured faculty positions. His work has been recognized on CNN, Forbes, CBS Brink, The Washington Post, ABC News, Canada AM, CBC Quirks and Quarks, the New York Post and by Wired Magazine, but I love this one. And Popular Mechanics, they recognized, Jeff, your amazing gecko mimicking biomedical adhesive work. And we're going to come back to that. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. We are thrilled. I wanted to ask you, Jeff, just to get started. So how does a boy from a small Ontario city who grew up with learning disability become one of the world's great scientists?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that nice introduction and for inviting me on your show.
Hey.
Yeah, I think, I struggled a lot when I was younger. Actually, in the second grade, I really just wasn't understanding anything. I couldn't even sound out words. My mom tried phonics and cue cards and all kinds of things, but I just didn't get it. And the teacher wanted to hold me back a year. So to repeat the second grade, and my parents negotiated so that if I went into special education, that summer, that I could proceed to the third grade, if everything went well. So I went to special education. And when I was there, they actually asked me a really critical question that literally changed my life, which was they would ask me a bunch of questions. Some I could answer, some I couldn't. For the ones I could answer, they said, "How did you think about that?" And no one had ever asked me that question before. I was 7 years old, maybe that's why, but they asked me that question. And it hit me all of a sudden that I could think about my thinking, that I didn't just have to say what was ever in my mind, but that there was actually a process to thinking things through before giving an answer. And that was really a kind of flip the switch moment for me. And I did continue to struggle because my school had very limited resources, and they were unable to provide kind of people who had some special needs with services like access to resource rooms and things like that. So what happened was I was basically getting C's and D's in school until the seventh grade, when my mom went up against the school board because the school refused to. She put an entire package together, my entire, history, and she essentially pushed it through for me to be recognized as having a learning difference, and I also was diagnosed with ADHD. And so my grades immediately flipped from, C's and D's to A's, because my mom had really instilled in me that even though I was struggling for many years, that I did have potential, and that there was, kind of something special behind all of, something special within. I mean, I was getting a lot of negativity from my teachers who told me, they would ask me what I want to be when I grow up, and I'd say a doctor. And then they would say, well, you better set your sights lower because, you just don't have that in you. And they would call me lazy and, all kinds of things. And eventually, I was getting into trouble and kind of visiting the principal's office quite often. So I think that, what it really was those early struggles, having, the support of my mom and my parents, and really, I think, eventually getting identified and having some, essentially what led to extra time on tests and exams and being able to write in another room. I think it was just when I was presented with questions, there'd just be all these possibilities would come into my mind, and I wasn't sure what the teacher was really asking, and I just needed more time to kind of figure it out and figure out what was the most likely response that they were looking for. So that kind of, I think, was the beginning phase of how things really started off with these struggles, but eventually turned into my true enjoyment of some of the subjects that I was learning, and that kind of took me on my path.
Wow, that's quite a story. You're remarkable. It sounds like your mother was remarkable to fight the system, and your parents sound like they're incredible. And good for you, because when I was actually getting to know you through my research, I realized that you have great qualities with ambition, but also with persistence. And it probably was born when you were 7, but I can see that it existed much earlier than that. So well done. When I was oddly enough, learning about you, Jeff, I found a quote that I found interesting. I thought that it may describe you. And it actually came to me yesterday. Somebody just sent it to me and I really liked it. So it says your own ambition and persistence. Ambition is the path to success, but persistence is the vehicle you arrive in. And I have a feeling that you're all about persistence. That's certainly what I learned while I was learning about you. And I got to tell you, I loved it. I wanted to talk to you a bit about some of the things that you have accomplished, but I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. I truly do believe that the human mind cannot be defeated. We will find a way. And why I wanted you on the show was simply because I think you're a great example of the human mind cannot be defeated. We will find a way. And I'm wondering if you could comment. Do you agree, or where are you with that?
Yeah, I mean, and even going back to the quote that you brought up, which I think really is a great quote. And I think, for me early on, I wasn't persistent, really. I mean, it was just, these struggles I was encountering. I wasn't getting anything in school. I just, and I needed help to understand what was being asked of me. And so my tendency was to just give up very quickly, to be angry, frustrated, to have anxiety build up, and just sort of flip the switch off. And so that was kind of my early years. And I think that what really led to the persistence that kind of grew over time was having that support, from my parents, and which I think was just really critical. And then there was a few key teachers that also were memorable. My seventh grade teacher, Lyle Couch, he somehow saw through what most of the others couldn't. And, he believed in me. And that to me was also really key, like having someone outside of my family who believed in me. And I think that really helped also kind of flip that switch on to be persistent and to kind of go the extra mile because I had to develop all these tools along the way in order to cope. And these tools were just ended up being, tools to be able to, not just get by, but initially was just to get by, but then to thrive. Like, for example, one of the tools that I really counted on a lot was kind of living for the questions, and
Mhm.
being able to figure out that because my mind was just so distracted. And so it was kind of developing these tools so that I couldn't be defeated, like,
Right.
because I felt like I was being defeated. And so it was really the tools, like, for example, like when I asked a question, I realized that my attention could be focused. And so it ended up being a tool that I could almost like pinch my brain and squeeze all the other thoughts out. If I asked a teacher a question, I then became laser focused on the answer. And so that's how I kind of started to learn how to learn and be able to kind of absorb things. And once I started absorbing things, things really took off because my curiosity was running wild. Like I was actually making progress.
Wow, it's fascinating because it proves again that people can overcome, and you're just an incredible example of overcoming and being brave. And what I find fascinating is, like most people, your story has affected so many lives. And when I was doing the research on you, I became fascinated because you talk about that we can find things in nature. And I love the story of how you got yourself funded so that you could get into your first lab, and together you came up with the gecko adhesive with the other scientists. Wondering if you could talk a bit about that gecko adhesive. By the way, you're going to get to, I hope, hydrophobic part of it. I deal with hydrophobic products in a different business of mine. So I was fascinated by the gecko adhesive. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So when I got to MIT, and I think you kind of alluded to, actually initially I applied to Professor Robert Langer's lab at MIT,
Mhm.
and he said no. But there was a bit of a caveat there. He said that, and the reason that he wasn't going to accept me was because I didn't have, he doesn't have any funding.
Mhm.
So I thought about it, and I was like, I had essentially through the struggles kind of developed all these coping strategies and processes to to get by and then thrive. And so I immediately thought, well, wait a moment, what if I got my own funding? Would he accept me? So I responded to him and asked, if I could be self-funded, would you accept me? And he said yes. And then I wrote him back and said, would you put that in writing? And he said, sure. So he actually put it in writing. I
That's
attached it to a
amazing.
fellowship application to the Canadian government, which was the time when applications you had to print them out, and there was really no place for a letter of support, but I just tacked it on. And then I ended up getting the fellowship application, and that's how I actually ended up going to MIT. So it was really initially a
Wow.
no that got flipped into a yes. So so when I was in his lab, there were just so many things going through my mind. It was people from all over the world, probably 100 researchers in his lab at the time, and just covering chemistry and biology and medicine and material science. It was really just like a playground. And one night I was working late, and I was kind of walking through the lab, kind of headed toward my desk, and I noticed somebody had on their desk this like journal article open with a picture of Spider-Man and that had like an action figure hanging from the ceiling. And I knew immediately it was like a nature journal. So I went to my desk and I searched it up, and someone had figured out how geckos can walk up the wall and hang from a single
Wow.
toe. There's no glues or suction
Wow.
cups or anything like that. They have this kind of hierarchical design where they're these nano hairs, essentially, just like these tiny hairs, maybe 1,000 times smaller than a human hair or so,
Wow.
and it just maximizes the surface area of contact and makes these forces that typically are meaningless actually become meaningful. And I was just fascinated by it. And I thought, well, wait a moment. What these researchers did was create a dry adhesive tape, that could be used in industry to move maybe glass around or something like that. But what if we could create a tissue adhesive? Because there's significant limitations with sutures and staples used in surgery. When you tie, let's say, do sutures, each time you have to realign the tissue, so it takes a long time to do sutures. Sometimes you have 100 sutures you have to place for certain procedures, and so that means the patient's on the operating table for a longer period of time, and that can lead to more complications. And staples, you actually have to bend them in order for them to adhere to tissue, and so you can't really use them that well internally in minimally invasive procedures. And so it turned out through kind of looking around and talking to a bunch of doctors that there was a huge unmet need for tissue adhesives
Hmm.
that could be used inside the body, not just on the skin, but in very
Wow.
wet environments. And so we went on to develop a gecko-inspired tissue adhesive that was fully biodegradable, and essentially it was like in a tape form. And from there we actually went on to develop maybe 4 or 5 other platforms, tissue adhesive platforms, that could be used in for surgical procedures.
Wow. And a gecko, of course, is just a small lizard, I believe. Is
That's
that
right. Yeah. So gecko, it kind of come in different sizes and different colors and things. But the Tukai gecko is, pretty substantial,
Hmm.
size, I would say, and yet it can really just hang from a wall like with a single toe. It's incredible the
Wow.
amount of adhesion that it can achieve.
Gee, I think I'm going to write a new comic called Gecko Man because we already have Spider-Man. And then only because I'm interested in the heart myself, I noticed that hydrophobic, which is of course pushing away liquids. So your adhesive works because it's able to push away blood, I guess, in the heart, if I understood that correctly.
Yeah, so we developed after that project, we were approached by a doctor at Boston Children's Hospital who was trying to figure out how to seal holes inside a beating heart, which is a very challenging environment inside the human body, just because the heart's beating on average 60 beats a minute and multiple expansion contraction cycles and rushing blood. Of course, every surface in the heart is covered with a layer of blood. And so we were interested in trying to figure out, how might we develop, because the gecko adhesive was a first platform, but it wouldn't work inside a beating heart. It just didn't have the right sort of properties. So we needed to design something different. And we took a look at a bunch of creatures in nature. It's kind of a theme in the lab to turn to nature for inspiration. And we looked at creatures that exist in wet dynamic environments, like sandcastle worms are these worms that sit on a rock in the sea and waves are crashing against them and they stay put. And then there's also snails or slugs. Sometimes you'll see a snail sitting on a leaf and it's raining and it's not falling off. It's just stuck there. Or sometimes, it's kind of going on the ground. You see this kind of goo behind it. And what we noticed was that a lot of these creatures that exist in wet dynamic environments, they have these secretions that are viscous, so kind of like honey, but they contain hydrophobic agents, and things that are hydrophobic, as you said, can repel water. And we were thinking, well, could repel blood as well. And so we developed a tissue glue that we could put onto a biodegradable patch. And when we put this glue up against tissue, we showed that it could repel the blood away from the surface of the heart and then actually infiltrate into the tissue. And we developed a lot of light activatable material. So we then shined light on it and then it cured. And light can go into tissue like 50 microns or 100 microns, just enough to cure the glue inside the tissue to get a very strong bond. And so that's was kind of like one of the next platforms that we developed, which is currently undergoing a few clinical trials.
Wow, so fascinating. Well, no pun intended, but stick to it. And I have to say, it is fascinating. I fell in love with your idea of following nature for answers. I just find that so fascinating. The TED Talk that you gave that I watched, and everybody, you can find Jeff Karp's TED Talks on YouTube. They're worth your time and his videos, I can assure you. But you did a TED Talk called Turning Failure into Success, 3 Principles of Radical Simplicity. I'm a very simple guy. So when I saw the title Radical Simplicity, I thought that was really, really great. I'm wondering if you could talk about what that is and why it made a difference for you.
Yeah, so it's really become like a fundamental kind of intention in the laboratory to keep things as simple as possible. And the reason is that we and others have experienced many times this sort of situation where we develop a technology and then realize that it's just too complicated to make it to patients, that it can't be manufactured, or there's just too many steps involved. Because if you have multiple manufacturing steps, you need to do quality control at each of those steps. And that not only gets expensive, but you increase your risk for failure along the way. And so there were a number of situations early in my career where we developed technologies that had very, I'd say, strong potential in terms of functionality and ability to work. And we developed a technology, for example, I was really excited about first project in my lab, really, where we took stem cells out of the body and we modified the surface so that when you put them back in the body, we could get them to kind of almost like GPS for your car. We could kind of dial in based on what we knew about blood vessels in different tissues and be able to get the cells to kind of concentrate in different areas around the body. So you could target them to a site of inflammation or to a wound, for example. And we actually had some nice proof of concept data on that. And then I went to a venture capitalist, all excited and kind of confident that this was, going to help a lot of patients. And he took one look at it and he said, Jeff, this is really interesting, but it's just far too complex. And we would never invest in anything like this because it's too complicated. And so, I kind of went back to the lab with my tail between my legs kind of thing. And it was a little bit of a tough blow. But then I really took that advice to heart and I started thinking, okay, how can we in every single project in the lab, really maximize simplicity? And that's where this concept of radical simplicity came from. And so when we're starting a project and throughout the entire project, we'll continually ask the question if we can simplify it. Sometimes you can't. Things just need to be complicated, at least like as we, for an initial proof of concept. But then we come back afterwards and then we say, okay, now is there another, once we've kind of paved the way forward for a new approach, is there a way that we can simplify this? And it's actually been critical for us to be able to develop new technologies in the lab and get them into clinical trials.
Wow, it's so fascinating. Congratulations. I know that you quoted that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And I thought that was incredible. I mean, we're all told, KISS, keep it simple, sweetheart. But the truth is, I couldn't imagine KISS in the kind of work that you're doing. And yet that's exactly what you're working on,
Hmm.
is keeping it simple. So congratulations. Wow, just fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, I bet you never thought that there's so much to the things that can save your life. Thank God we have people like Jeff. Okay, you do other quotes. I want to talk about your persistence a little bit, and that goes to other things that you're working on. But in one of your great deliveries, you quoted the great Michael Jordan. And I love this. And for those of you who don't know, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you know who Michael Jordan is. If not, like my mother would say, then look it up. Michael Jordan said, I missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot, and I missed. I've failed over and over in my life. That's why I succeed. Jeff, it's got to be over and over and over again in what you do and your colleagues do. Can you give us an idea of some of the other things that you're working on and perhaps how that persistence is playing a role?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think that, there's many examples that I could give. In fact, not that long ago, I kind of took some time one day or over a couple of days to write out all the significant failures that I had kind of encountered in my life, and what kind of insights that I gained, and it kind of hit me that failure is actually a really interesting tool. And I think that we learn in school in many ways that kind of failure is like one way and success is the other way, and you want to avoid going this way and you want to maximize going that way. But what I've learned in my experience is that it's almost like we want to fail our way to success,
Yes.
that failure is an integral step, where we can really uncover the most important insights and opportunities for growth. And so I think that really is a big part of persistence,
Yes.
is sort of forming a relationship with failure. I'll give you, I can give many examples. One example is, like, let's say, when I started my faculty position, I had a startup package that lasted for 3 years. And after 3 years, I have to have full grant support. Well, I started writing grants, but I really wanted to write grants on things that I hadn't worked on before. I wanted to almost like kind of reinvent myself. And
Right.
I was advised not to do that because it was risky, but I didn't want to just continue what I had done before and just sort of add to it. I
Mhm.
wanted to switch gears and do things that I was, just deeply curious about at that moment. And so I started to write grants, and, I started then also to get rejections one after the other. And my first 2.5 years, almost all my grants were rejected, about 100 or over 100 in that time frame. So we're talking 90 something that were rejected, to the point
Wow.
that,
Wow.
one day I came home and Jessica, my wife, said, "Are you sure this is really the right career for you?" And in some ways, I feel like that may have even motivated me a little bit more. But what happened, what I noticed actually during this time, was that most, not all, but most of the grants that I would write, when I got a rejection, there'd be feedback. And initially, I'd be angry. I almost, every time I got a rejection, it feels like you're being punched in the face. But I noticed that after a day or two, have a good night's sleep, that anger subsides. And then so I really couldn't look at the reviews and what the comments were right away. I needed to kind of give myself a little bit of time. But once the emotional part sort of subsided, and that, I think it's important for that to be in that space for that
Sure.
time. And once that dissipated, I looked at the feedback, and I just started to notice patterns in the feedback I was getting. And it kind of got to the point where, when I would write a new grant, I would take some of that feedback and sort of incorporate it. And it kind of got to the point where it's almost like I could envision like 10 people sitting around a table reviewing my grants, and I knew every negative thing they were going to say about it before I even submitted it. And by sort of thinking like that, and then addressing those points before submission, I increased my success rate. And then in, the 2.5 year mark, 3 grants were funded simultaneously. My lab tripled in size, and,
Wow.
I was ready to go. So that was kind of, a big part of it, I think, is just having, developing that relationship with failure and sort of looking at it as an opportunity to grow. And there's always these kind of nuggets of insights in there that I think could be instrumental for, and I've also noticed, sort of looking at people who have really achieved great things in life, that it seems like almost everyone that I've looked at, the more they've achieved, the more they've failed to get to those achievements. And
Yes.
so, and I think society is sort of talking about that more and more now, although it has been, I think, for many years, kind of like a taboo subject to openly discuss failure. But I feel we should be doing that, because that's really where where the special sauce is, where we really need to be focused on if we want to, kind of change the world and lead fulfilling lives.
I learned very early, and it was a really, really tough decision when I started to build businesses, that failure can either hold you back or propel you forward. And it's you who decides. Nobody else can decide for you. And sometimes that's a tough topic to learn, but thank you for sharing about failure, because I think if everything just came to us so easily, we wouldn't get to enjoy failure, and therefore a
Yes.
bigger success when we get there. And congratulations on that. And perhaps this is a good time to ask you a question. Based on the amount of times that we fail, and I've often thought about the idea of this thing is impossible. Well, I've always believed that something's impossible more of a factor of where we are in our own development as creatures, and that in the future something won't be impossible, so therefore nothing's impossible. I'm wondering for you, where can mankind go? You must see a completely open ability for us to eventually get to anywhere that we want to be. I'm wondering your comments on that.
Yeah, this is something that I think about quite a bit, and sort of how, I think this also speaks to, in some respect, this sort of human phenomenon, but it's actually not just human, it's in the animal kingdom broadly, is sort of habituation and sensitization. And I think that we quickly get habituated to things and sort of lose our sensitivity to really appreciate how far we've come, both personally and I think like as a society. And really we sort of, I think, lose this sense of wonder and amazement at how we're talking right now live. And how does that work? I mean, that's
Yeah.
like a few decades ago that was thought as impossible.
Yes.
And the fact that we're going in airplanes and traveling to the moon, and it's like every single technology that you can kind of look at was at some point it didn't exist, and many things were not thought as possible by mainstream scientists and researchers, or kind of the key thought leaders at the time. And so I think that that it's almost like human nature in many ways, that we draw these solid lines around things, but then later we realize that they're just dotted lines. And so we have these kind of perceived boundaries in terms of what we can achieve or what we can do. And I think that we also experience that personally. I think, for example, I mean, this is just like a tiny example, but recently I was in Panama. I was actually in the jungle of Panama
Hmm.
with my family, and which was really incredible. And there was this waterfall, and I was trying to climb up this waterfall, and it seemed like something I was kind of like, I don't think I can do this, but I just really took my time and made my way through it, and kind of got to this point where I was further than I thought I would go. And it was almost like I'd unlocked this courage, this and I feel like we all have that within us. We all have, there's very few, like, we I think that we use a very small percentage of the human machinery. And we all have this incredible potential that we can tap into. And when we tap into it, it just floods our brain with these positive neurotransmitters and makes us feel great. And, we can identify this courage that, I think we all have within us. And I think it's the same thing for developing new technologies, that it's almost like, there's nothing that we can think of that couldn't, there's few things that are impossible. It's just anything that we can imagine. I think one day we can create it in some form or another, and it's just a matter of time. And I think it's hard to see that in the moment, but when we look backwards, personally or as a society, I think it becomes clear that we've achieved things that are just mind-boggling. And if you could kind of go back in time 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, 200 years, a lot of things today would just seem like would just stay in the imaginary world, but yet here we are. And so I try to connect with that, really, to live a life as much as I can with gratitude for where we're at. When I'm in an airplane, I'm thinking like just how amazing it is that we're able to fly. And when I'm talking to people through Zoom or whatever it is, Teams or whatever, like just sort of, I do think about that this is really incredible that we can be having this conversation and not be in the same room.
Well, I have to say, I agree with you. And for me, gratitude is about the biggest motivator that I have. Because if you look at what we have, then you know that we can keep going. And having been on a lot of planes the last few days, I have to admit, they are miraculous. It's even more miraculous when actually you go up, then you're down, and then you can find your luggage. Now that's miraculous.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah. I mean, yeah. No, I was just gonna say the systems in place to sort the luggage. And I mean, like, there's so much that we don't see. There's so many processes that we don't sort of, get to see, but there's just been so much innovation, even like, in how our water gets to our taps, or how our waste is managed, or the recycling, or how our luggage kind of gets to the right conveyor belt. I mean, all these things are, it's taken iteration and failure and persistence, and yet here we are.
And Jeff, that's why I created this podcast, because I sincerely and truthfully believe that the human mind cannot be defeated. It may be a factor of time when we find answers, but we really, really do great things. Jeff, you just came out with a new book, and I'm excited. I wanted you to talk about it, but I understand that you've been working on it for about 7 years. We seem to have that persistence title again. Talk about your book, please.
Yeah, you're right. It's been over 7 years that I've been working on this book.
Wow.
And my wife reminded me that we met in the year 2000, and I think somewhere around that time I told her that I wanted to write a book. And so the book is it's coming out on April the 9th of this year. It's called Lit Life Ignition Tools, and it's all about intercepting our routine patterns to
Okay.
actively think and decide versus just jump in with habitual responses. And the book is organized into, each chapter is a tool. And so there are 12 tool chapters. And it's kind of like a holistic set of tools, in the sense of that we will like that one would use multiple tools kind of simultaneously to tap into the things that we've been talking about, this human potential to really be able to identify these patterns that just don't serve us anymore, and to be able to find ways to take a step forward towards changing these patterns, which I think really unlocks a lot of meaning in our life, deepens experiences, and helps to deepen connections with other people and with ourselves.
Wow, it's going to be so exciting. I have April 9th now marked on my calendar, and I presume that people will be able to order it on Amazon, things like that. How can they find the book?
Yeah, it's published by HarperCollins, and should be available on all major, outlets. including Amazon and a Chapters. I think that's still kicking in
It
Canada.
is called Indigo, I think, but you're right, it's
Oh,
kicking.
Indigo. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
We'll
Right.
call Heather about you, Heather Reisman. Jeff, do you
Okay.
think that you'll be going on speaking tours and book signings and things like that? Are your agents putting you on those?
There's a few things that are being lined up. So yeah, it's a really exciting time. And yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing, the tools with others. We actually, so I interviewed 40 people for the book, including people in my laboratory, Nobel Prize winners, Olympic medalists, an Indigenous leader, and a musician, a photographer, social justice leaders, people from kind of various walks of life, and just asked them about, how they achieve intentionality in their lives and what's the process for that. And so in the book, I've described a lot of tools, not just the ones that I've developed through my life, but also, how others have achieved intentionality and been able to break through these kind of repetitive autopilot patterns in their lives to just unlock their limitless potential, really.
I have to thank you so much for coming on. And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to want to get this book. And I have to say, Jeff, as I said a minute ago, I have great gratitude that you've come on today. But let's recognize a young man, a boy with learning disabilities, with the right help and the right guidance, is now one of the world's leaders when it comes to science, when it comes to inventions that make our lives better, a great scholar and a really good speaker. You got to listen to him on TED Talk, by the way. He's good. Jeff, thank you. Bless you. We are so happy to have you on. You do prove to me that the human mind can't be defeated. So thank you for just making me look smart.
Hey, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been
Really,
great to speak with you.
thank you. It's been such a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again next week. As always, take care.